Secretary Turk, let me give this a try. What's the difference between living in a world with 1 degree C of increased temperature and say 3 degrees C of increased temperature, and the difference in the costs that we will experience as a nation under those two scenarios?
So the orders of magnitude are so much greater if we don't get our act together than if we do what we need to do, and we have all those jobs, especially in America, if we lead on the clean energy front. Orders of magnitude difference.
Let's talk about those jobs for a moment. The Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law about 9 months ago. Our friends in the House of Representatives have put forward legislation to repeal that. That's despite announcements representing at least $150 billion in manufacturing investments in the United States. 46 factories, 18,000 jobs that represents. What would be the impact if we repealed the incentives that are in the Inflation Reduction Act?
So I think they'd be catastrophic at this absolutely critical moment, as Chair Murray said at the outset. We are seeing the kind of momentum at reshoring American manufacturing across the board, not just with batteries, not just with solar PV, but across the board. We're seeing that momentum because Congress has led, because the United States government is leading, putting in place those kinds of incentives. You take those away, and those jobs are going to go elsewhere, and we're going to see those opportunities.
2022 was a record year for factory investment in the United States. Are we expecting the same thing in 2023?
We're expecting even more.
Yeah.
We're seeing momentum. Why would we cut back as on the moment we're actually succeeding?
To shift gears a little bit, there's approximately 30,000 folks who are employed at Sandia and Los Alamos National Laboratories. Both of those labs have cited workforce retention and recruitment as their primary issue in addressing national security missions. We appropriated a number of funds through the National Defense Authorization Act and the appropriation bills to try and address that. Has that had a positive impact, and what else can we do to address the retention issues?
So let me turn it over to Administrator Ruby. I'll just say this is a big, big deal for the Secretary, for myself, for all of us, and there's an awful lot of work we need to do on this front. Administrator?
Great. Thanks, Senator Heinrich. Well, I'm happy to report we've made some changes that are helping. We're not going to take our eye off of it. We can't do our job without those 30,000 people and all the other people in the enterprise. We made, because of the increases in attrition that we were seeing after COVID, we authorized a mid-year salary adjustment at the laboratories, plants, and sites. We lean forward in terms of adding flexibility to benefits that were more consistent with what the high-tech industry we have to compete with. We lean forward in terms of a competitive raise package for 23. And as a result of those activities, among other things we're trying to do to improve the work environment and the productivity, the overall attrition is close to normal now at both Los Alamos and Sandia and across the complex. We still have pockets where it's quite high, where it's very competitive. Actually, I'm sure the high-tech market has helped us. There's always a trade-off there, but we need to continue to lean forward, and we need to provide the very best work environment because we have the very best work. So we can keep people if we can do that. Thank you.
Deputy Secretary Turk, let's go back to the IRA for a minute. Can you walk us through implementation and all the things that DOE is doing now to make that legislation a success?
So this is a big, big deal and big piece of legislation, and certainly when you put it together with the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, this is the largest climate and clean energy legislation, not just in the U.S. by orders of magnitude. It's the biggest legislation ever in the history of humanity. And there's an awful lot we're doing at the Department of Energy. So we have a couple hundred of our folks working with Treasury and IRS to bring our expertise to bear on all of the tax provision piece of it. We also have about $100 billion that the taxpayers, have entrusted to us just at the Department of Energy. That's 70 new programs that we're setting up. Many of them are competitive cost share programs like the hydrogen hubs that have gotten so much attention. So we have created new offices. We've created a new undersecretary for infrastructure. We've now hired up over 500 people to fill those offices and taken folks from other parts of the department to have that instant capacity. And we're putting out FOAs almost on a daily on a funding opportunity announcements for companies and communities across the country, almost on a daily, sometimes hourly basis, to make sure those opportunities are out there for that real world impact.
Thank you. We had a recent hearing with Secretary Granholm where I talked to her fairly extensively about things like reconductoring and other transmission grid enhancing technologies. Can you talk a little bit, Secretary Turk, about the funds that we appropriated through the infrastructure law, how those are being used to facilitate transmission that continues to largely be a permitting and planning challenge, but is obviously one of the primary bottlenecks to getting dramatic amounts of additional clean generation onto the grid?
Well, first of all, Senator, thank you for your focus on transmission. This is a big, big deal. And if we don't get the transmission right in our country, we're not going to be successful in all of our efforts. There have been some estimates, some credible estimates, in fact, that of the all the climate benefits we get from the Inflation Reduction Act, a full 80% of those won't come to fruition unless we can do transmission at a higher rate going forward. We're doing about 1% per year in terms of enhancements on the transmission side of things. So we do have some funding streams. We created a whole new office, the Grid Deployment Office, to lean in, to use those funding streams, to get leverage from those funding streams. But we're also very aware that a key issue here, just as you said, is permitting. And right now, we are not doing what we need to do in terms of permitting and the timelines associated with permitting for new transmission lines across our country. We're engaged right now in extensive conversations with the White House, with interagency colleagues. Our secretary has spoken about this before, to use an existing law, and a law from 2005, to actually streamline the transmission permitting, to have timelines and very aggressive timelines to really get our act together on the transmission permitting side. There's also reconductoring and a number of key technologies that are very complementary to building new transmission lines as well that we're very focused on.
Great. You spoke a little bit about the work being done to decarbonize the industrial sector. Talk a little bit about the work that DOE is doing to decarbonize the transportation sector, particularly things like heavy trucking, trains, even aviation.
So transportation is the largest source of our emissions in the country, and we are very focused on this, have been for many years, but have some new tools and new resources in our tool belt. One of those is the funding for building out our charging infrastructure. And we have a joint office. It's a new experiment, a joint office with us in the Department of Transportation that's working out incredibly well. And we're getting funding to states to get it out the door to build that, to build those EV chargers across the country, to reduce that range anxiety and to make sure consumers across the country, not just in urban areas, but across the country, can benefit from electric vehicles. We're also working on other parts, not just the passenger vehicle side, just as you said. Trucking, aviation are incredibly important areas that we can lean in on. We've got a super trucks program that's really leaning in on R&D and trying to bring technical solutions and reduce those costs so that we can have low carbon, no carbon trucking solutions as well.
Senator Hagerty?